Chirimbolo says, stuff happens. What are we going to talk about today? Well, I thought we were going to talk about. Oh, Ping Pong Gen 5. Thanks for following. I thought we'd talk about, how the world is on fire. Essentially, um, I thought it would be important to discuss the, democratic um, downfall of the U.S. and like look at that from a perspective of, um, you know, yes, international law, but and human rights, but a little bit also from the perspective of the global South, because I think there's a lot of stuff happening in the US right now that should be raising alarms, but isn't. So maybe talk a little bit about, democratic backsliding in other places in the world and how there is a similarity with what's going on in the United States and how, well, not just in the United States, right? Look at what's going on in Germany right now, and how, I mean, sadly, it can get worse. And how I feel like stuff that is like pretty basic in the authoritarian rule book is being deployed in the United States with enormous success. And like, I don't understand why. Like, I guess it's a society that is not used to authoritarianism in the same way as I am. And I mean, like, let me give you an example. Um, the Nazi salutes. I mean, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. They're not like my heart goes to you salutes. They're not Roman salutes. They're Nazi salutes. They know what they're doing. They want you to like be talking about, oh my God, did you see the Nazi salute? They want you to discuss whether it is a Nazi salute or not. Um, but I feel like people are talking about these salutes in the wrong way. Maybe that'll be a good segue into the discussion, although you are about to go into an ad, so subscribe so you don't. um, but yeah, so let's talk about this. Like the Bannon, for example, or Verástegui, this Mexican, politician, actor. That's like they all do their like quote unquote like Roman salutes, right? Um, and the whole point is that at the end when they do their thing, um, everyone will talk about, oh, it was a uh, it was a Nazi salute, and then people will say, no, it wasn't. Yes, it was. And then you know what no one will do? No one will talk about um, the content of the speech. So take Steve Bannon, for example. Steve Bannon just went on, CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Committee, um, and this like huge conservative um, conference, and he literally said that Trump is the result of everyday people resisting through January 6th, and going against the wishes of people who quote unquote stole the election, which is in itself already bad, like stole the 2020 elections. So he's saying like the election was stolen, so we didn't really lose, but you guys revolted, you guys did an insurrection, and so that's why Trump is back in power. And then he goes on to say, and you know what? We want Trump in 2028. I mean, he just said it openly, right? But nobody is discussing it. If you Google Steve Bannon CPAC speech, you will get a bunch of articles about how he did a Nazi salute, right? Or how not just whether it was a Nazi salute. Right? Oh, hey, Magic of Carols, how are you? So nice to see you. Um, Whether or not it is a Nazi salute has become this like thing. So they know that. They know that. So the actual salute that they're doing has a double purpose. On the one hand, it signals, yes, I am crossing that line because I am in on the project. It's like a loyalty card, right? It's like a symbol that you are one of them. You're full in, and you are willing to prove it by making a Nazi salute in public. Right, so that's the first function. I guess it's the useful function for them. But oh, hey, Iconoclast, how are you? It's nice to see you. But then the other side, the other point is that it is a distractor. It's a distracting force. They do the Nazi salute, so that you talk about the Nazi salute and not about the reality that, the US's adventure with democracy is ending, right? It is ending. Um, Chirimbolo says, "Oh yeah, I look at U.S. politics and they seem very familiar. It's curious to see the American people react to that type of politics for the first time. Yeah, and badly, right? They're not doing it right. Like I'm surprised that there's no national demonstrations in the U.S. yet. Like they're losing their democracy as we speak, and they're still thinking. There's this phrase that I keep listening to, I keep hearing. The phrase is, "It's going to be a long 4 years." If you are thinking it's going to be a long 4 years, you're already on the wrong framework because it's not going to be a long 4 years. The point of the next 4 years is to make sure that it is only 4 years. And they think, oh no, that'll never happen. That's impossible. Like our checks and balances, our constitution is too strong. And like, I'm sorry to tell you, US, but your constitution is not strong. It is as weak as any other constitution. And I say this as a person from a country that has had 13 different constitutions. Our constitutions were not strong, and we tried to make them strong because we've had so many coups, because we've had so many revolutions. We have very paranoid constitutions, and they were not strong. The U.S. Constitution has never been tested, so of course it's not going to survive. Your checks and balances are nothing. We can go into a little bit more detail about that in a minute, but like, it's crazy to me to see how they are falling square into the trap in the U.S. and not conceiving that what is happening there is actually backsliding. It is There's a term coined by, I think it was coined by him, by Stephen Levitsky, who's this like a political scientist from Harvard. He calls it competitive authoritarianism, which is essentially, what Hugo Chavez did in Venezuela, or like what Alberto Fujimori did in Peru, or what Putin does in Russia, right? It's basically this electorally very successful authoritarian. So it's not your typical junta that just does a coup and stays in power. It is more like a guy who is very charismatic. It's usually a guy, and just wins elections. And when he wins elections, he starts taking steps to stay in power, to make it very difficult for them to leave. And eventually, before you know it, in the second, third term in office, then all of a sudden you can't get rid of them. And that's absolutely 100% what Trump tried to do in January 6th and what he's trying to do now with this freaking Project 2025. And that's just not something that Americans are, understanding, conceiving, looking at with gravitas. Oh, Feruzi, how are you? Thanks for welcoming me back. So Peruvian Andy says the Dems are incredibly bad. It's not just the Dems. That's the point. It's not just the Dems. It's as if like society in the United States is not ready to accept that the shining beacon in the hill is built on very weak institutions. Like they idealize, their founding fathers and think, oh, I mean, we made a musical about them, so of course this is gonna work out. But like, there's a little bit of complacency, like, oh, it cannot happen here. What are we? We're not a banana republic, This is the stuff that happens elsewhere, and I mean, I think it is very clear to me that Trump is acting as a competitive authoritarian who wants to stay in power. And Americans need to start discussing the possibility that he will. Like, okay, let's talk about checks and balances in the US Constitution, right? So the first thing that every single competitive authoritarian tries to do is to argue that term limits don't apply to them. And of course, the US has I think it's the 22nd Amendment that says that no one can be elected to the presidency twice. I'm very sure that like Trump is gonna say that because he didn't have like two consecutive terms, then that's not what the 22nd Amendment is designed for. He's gonna say it at some point. He's gonna like test the waters, see what people say, and there's the possibility that the GOP will accept that. And if the GOP accepts it, then yeah, it'll be a constitutional crisis. People will sue. It'll go to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court might even say you cannot run. Like it wouldn't be the first time that it happens. Like Evo Morales went through that, right? You cannot run, and then he will say, "Oh, but I can, and I will," and he'll grab some crazy, legal scholar to say, oh, actually, his interpretation is correct because, the unitary presidency and the president cannot do anything illegal or whatever. Steve Bannon in his speech talked about how men like Trump only come once every 100 years. It was George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, and Trump. And so when someone like that comes along, like quote unquote, a design of providence, literally he said that, an instrument of providence, sorry, then you don't let them go. You let them stay. And so I'm pretty sure that he's going to try. It might not work, but eventually his point is not to win the legal argument. Eventually his point is going to be to just have a constitutional crisis on his hands. The crisis is what he wants, is what he needs. He doesn't need to win the battle. He needs to create enough of a crisis so that people go to the Capitol and do a January 6th again. It's so obvious, so patent to me as a Latin American, and I don't understand why people don't talk about this in more serious terms. But even if that is the crazy scenario, even if that is that will never happen, come on, that's ridiculous, that's way too out there for the United States, it'll never fly, then okay, then sure, then he will try to pass a constitutional amendment that won't pass in time, and he'll have another constitutional crisis, and he'll try to do another January 6th. And if all that fails, then there's always the Putin option. He loves Putin, right? The Putin option is just run J.D. Vance for president. Get J.D. Vance elected as president with him as a running mate. And then J.D. Vance resigns or invokes the 25th Amendment and declares Trump president or acting president or whatever. And that's it. And then Trump elects him as vice president. And that's it. It's done. That is under the terms of the 22nd Amendment in the United States. Let me see if I can put the 22nd Amendment in the United States here. So it says, no person shall be elected to the office of the president more than twice, and no person who has held the office of the president or acted as president for more than 2 years of a term to which some other person was elected, so like the vice president, shall be elected to the office of the president more than once. Right? Okay, so J.D. Vance has not been elected to the office of the president, so he can run for president. And once he runs for president, then if he resigns and Trump is vice president, then he just becomes the elected acting president. That would not technically violate the terms of this amendment, because Trump would not have been elected to be president more than once. J.D. Vance would have. And they can keep on doing that, and he can stay in power. And every time he wins an election, he will secure his control over institutions more and more. I don't understand why this is not the discussion. I don't understand what the discussion is. Was it a Nazi salute or not? I mean, sure, it is important. We should discuss the first part of this. The first part being the membership card to the MAGA movement right now is, are you willing to make a Nazi salute in public? That is worth discussing. That is worth whoa, what happened, right? But that should not come at the expense of, hey, wait a minute, you're doing a Nazi salute so we don't see what you're doing. So that we don't see Steve Bannon telling a crowd that if you January 6 Trump into office in 2028, then maybe he can stay because he's the next Abraham Lincoln, the next George Washington, and you cannot let him just not be elected. I mean, why is that not the conversation? Why is that not in every single piece of media out there? I don't understand why. As a Latin American, I don't understand. It's so patently clear to me what's going on, that the US has entered a period of competitive authoritarianism, and it needs to act, it needs to do something about it, or lose its democracy. And sadly, from what I'm seeing, I remember when Trump got elected, I tweeted, when is the first national protest against Trump? Protest now, during Biden, that he's going to let you protest, so that you can create a pressure movement, you can start organizing people, you can start creating a movement to resist union organizers, local organizers, get a movement going. And no one did. A friend of mine told me, oh, but we're in mourning. I was like, well, I mean, mourn faster. Because now it's too late. Do you really think that if you start a movement right now against Trump, Trump is not going to declare them traitors or something and release the National Guard on them? Now it's going to be a lot more difficult to organize. I don't understand the lack of urgency, the lack of gravitas. Sorry, this is a long rant about the US descending into authoritarianism.